My name is Larry Gould. I came in the spring of 1981 for my interview, and at that time, Rarick Hall was brand new. And I had a very good interview with the students and with the staff, and they decided that it was appropriate to invite me to the university as a faculty member in political science. In terms of how I probably made an impact at Fort Hays at the beginning, one of the items I would have put on my list to talk about would be the Docking Institute of Public Affairs. I was asked in 1984, you want to take this thing and do something with it? It had already been approved by the Kansas Board of Regents, but nobody had done anything with it. And so I said, sure, why not? We put the Model United Nations, and we put a number of economic development programs that were important to Western Kansas under the auspices of what eventually became the Docking Institute. And then I chaired the committee for the next president of Fort Hays State University, and we ended up picking Ed Hammond. And I knew that we needed to do some things that were different from the previous administration or 7 or 8 years that I had been here. And one of the things was to name the Institute of Public Affairs. I went to my department chair, Dr. Don Slechta, at the time. Don said, well, you could try for the Dole family, but my guess is they're going to go with K-State or KU. And when I inquired, he was exactly right. I then thought about, as Don said, I should think about the Docking family. In many ways, they're the first family of the state of Kansas, with 2 governors and a lieutenant governor. So I had a chance to connect with Tom Docking down in Wichita in 1986. And then ultimately, Tom said, yeah, let's do it. And it has become one of the most important social science institutes in the state of Kansas for analyzing social issues, social trends, political issues, political trends in the state of Kansas, and secondarily, helping Fort Hays State University connect and engage with all of those social issues and political trends that are occurring across the state. It has also become, over the years, a very important incubator for students in political science, sociology, leadership studies, and criminal justice. Have their students in the Docking Institute learning how to do survey analysis, learning about how to communicate with the public in the state, doing a whole number of things that you would learn in an institute. I became the Dean of Arts and Sciences after a 2-year journey as the executive assistant to the president. I became the dean in August of 1991. The college had 16 departments in it at that point in time. But the Dean of Arts and Sciences role was great experience for me in terms of learning about the university, learning about the Kansas Board of Regents system, just kind of setting myself up and preparing myself for any additional responsibilities that would come along. It was quite a task bringing the social sciences, the humanities, and the sciences, the natural sciences, all together at any one time. But we did it, and for 8 years I served in that role as Dean of Arts and Sciences. So I became Provost in 1998. The most important thing that happened while I was Provost took place in November 1999, a year after I'd actually acquired the position. And that was when Cindy Elliott came to me and said, you know, there's a guy out there that has a private university in China. And I knew, because of my own teaching and research, that China had allowed private universities, meaning those that were created in China and not a part of the government, in 1997. So Shawn Chen had bought a small university, a private university called SIAS University. I don't know what it was called before that. It had about 2,200 students at that point in time. And Shawn basically knew there was an opportunity here to partner with an American university of some type, because he could use that as a marketing tool in China. You get a Chinese degree, but you also get an American degree if you graduate from SIAS University. And Cindy came to me and said, what do you think about a partnership with a Chinese university? This guy's having a kind of a hard time, but he also knows we have a very affordable tuition rate, which would be important to the rising middle class in China. I said, tell him to come in here and we can talk. One of the things I didn't do, which I'm not really sure why I didn't do it, I think most of it I just simply forgot, was to tell the president that we were doing this. And it wasn't until 6 months later when he got a letter from Zhengzhou University, which is the mother university of SIAS, had called me in and said, what are you doing? I've got this letter that says you guys can't do this without consulting us. And I said, oh, I didn't really know that, but we've already started the program, and we started it with 25 students. Within 6 months, we had 40 students. And by 2002, we had our first graduation. Went to China and basically saw SIAS University for the first time. I think when it went across the crawl at the bottom of CNN and Ed saw it, he thought, okay, I think we got a successful program here. And the next year, I didn't go to the graduation, he went to the graduation. Now today we have 4,400 students in China. Over the years, we've basically accumulated millions of dollars of net profit from the program, and certainly has kept the tuition for Fort Hays State at a very affordable level for anybody. One of the things that happened while I was at Fort Hays State was the bringing of the American Democracy Project from ASCU, American Association of State Colleges and Universities, to Fort Hays State. Young people were known for 200 years not to vote very effectively or very much in numbers that they should have been voting in. And the American Democracy Project was designed basically to get them civically engaged, but equally important to get them to vote in larger numbers than they ever have. It involves service learning, it involved voting. At the time, we also were creating a Center for Civic Leadership. And so that seemed like an appropriate place to kind of get some leadership, and we did. Curt Brungardt, who took over as the Omer professor, and he had created that position much by himself, but it became something very much in sync with what we were doing in the American Democracy Project and the Center for Civic Leadership, and in the Leadership Studies program overall. And it just simply grew for quite some time. One idea that Paul Faber, who has been the Dean of Arts and Sciences for quite some time and now has retired, he basically came up with something called Times Talk. Part of the American Democracy Project provided us basically subscriptions to the New York Times for every faculty member, for every student, for every staff member. And also the New York Times, under its Director for Educational Leadership, was able to provide us with about $1,200 every year to buy food, pizzas and salads and whatever, for people that became involved in what were called Times Talks. When I was a faculty member, I had a variety of people. Jim Petree, who is our Dean of Continuing Education, and Ray Youmans, who is another fellow that played a role in the Continuing Education Office, come to me and say, hey, you want to teach an American government course in Garden City, or you want to teach one in Dodge City? And I said, I don't know, do I? And they said, well, we got some tapes here that you can use to create the course. All that time, and this was at the end of my time as a full-time faculty member in the late 1980s and into my tenure as Dean of Arts and Sciences, I kept saying, there's got to be a better way to motivate and entice faculty to do these things, because if this is a good way of creating student credit hour production, of recruiting students, especially in Western Kansas, we need to do it more efficiently and more effectively. It was, 1997, 1998, before I became provost. It's something called the internet, which I knew existed, but I never knew it would exist on the scale that it is now. But I began to see a little bit of that in terms of people creating what were called interactive television courses, ITV courses, and online courses. And so in the late 90s, I basically came up with a number of policy statements with people like Dennis King and others that basically said, we're going to give you some money for creating a course that will entice you in a way that you've never been enticed before. It was very timely because we were a leader. We were one of the top 10 institutions ultimately in terms of offering online education in the United States for quite some time. The growth of online education was something that I take great pride in as well, and really hope that it continues in the future and we do some new and important things with artificial intelligence and other kinds of things that are coming along that are technology-based. The other things that have occurred, the programs that I started, the first one I did, which was a part of a partnership between Kansas State University and Fort Hays, was social work. The Kansas State people were going to drop the undergraduate social work program. That would have meant we had nothing. We had an associate program of social work, but the degrees always came through Kansas State University. When I heard that, I said, I don't know, this is pretty important to Western Kansas. And we started our own program. I sat down over several months between Rose Arnhold and Judy Caprez, and we put that program together using much of the curriculum from Kansas State, but also adding some of our own. The second one came in 1996, kind of in the middle of my tenure as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and that was the Master of Liberal Studies program. When I became Dean in 1992, I basically got rid of 7 graduate academic programs that the Kansas Board of Regents said they don't have enough enrollment. One of them was political science in my own department. That I basically said, yeah, enough is enough. I don't need you guys harassing me about enrollment. Okay, let's try a Master of Liberal Studies program that will be a college degree, not necessarily a disciplinary degree. At our high point, we had almost 400 students in the Master of Liberal Studies in the early 2000s. Also in 1996, Criminal Justice, which at that time was called Justice Studies, became one of the programs. I found a guy out on the internet somewhere. He came from a Texas school. His name was Robert Scott. And we brought him to Fort Hays, and he and I wrote the Criminal Justice program. That program grew tremendously and today still has a very central role in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Fort Hays. Another program, which came out of an acquaintance with a guy out of Denver, is now today called Informatics. At that point in time, it was called Information Networking and Telecommunications. Because at the time, there was a number of questions about where is information going? How will technology change information that we normally just read out of a book? What's going to happen to all this? And so I felt it was necessary to have a program that offered faculty a chance to address the things in the liberal arts that a lot of people were discussing across the globe, not just at Fort Hays State University. Mark Bannister took over the program in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think it was. And he did some things with it that I hadn't thought about, like create a partnership, a certification with Cisco, a technology networking company, and it's now what we call Informatics. So that was another program that started in my tenure as Dean of Arts and Sciences and ultimately grew in the 2000s, in the 21st century, in my role as Chief Academic Officer. I did not make all those things grow. There was a demand out there was a market, but also I had some very competent people who did a great job in terms of making those programs into the success that they ultimately have become.